Okay, yeah, thank you very much for coming. I'm very happy to see so many friends and colleagues here because we have an excellent and nice guest here. And please excuse the quarter of an hour, but that's perfectly fine. Academic quad, so that's we are in that time frame. Yeah, so welcome to the first seminar of our spring and summer cycle of seminars in digital and public humanities organized by the Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities at the Department for Humanities at Ca' Foscari University. And yeah, we start with a highlight today. Before I introduce you to Giovanna Cesarani, just to mention we do a recording as always, and this will be uploaded, if you agree, Giovanna, to our YouTube channel. And yeah, Giovanna will make the presentation, and then there will be lots of space for discussion also with the audience online. I think that's it for the formalities. Giovanna Cesarani is professor of classics and history at Stanford University, author of a very well-selling book, I think, Italy's Lost Greece, Magna Graecia and the Making of Modern Archaeology, director of the Grand Tour project, on which she has published, in addition of a World Map by Travel project and the Mapping the Republic of Letters project. Her research is focusing on classical tradition and the intellectual history of classical scholarship, historiography, and archaeology from the 18th century onwards. She is the faculty director of CESTA, the Stanford Center for Spatial and Textual Analysis. And in that role, she and we created a strong personal and institutional partnership between our centers, which is wonderful, and was an intense exchange and mutual visits of PhD students, Marie Curie fellows, and staff in the past 2 years. And here and today, Giovanna is going to talk about the Grand Tour project and her recently published book, A World Made by Travel. So a very innovative format, and the title of her presentation is Digital History and 18th Century Journeys to Italy. So thank you. Take all your time. We have no haste, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for being here. And yes, it has been wonderful to be part of this exchange, so much so that I thought I knew where I was going, while it wasn't quite true yet. So
we went to the representative place, which is more appropriate.
But and I'm very happy to have the opportunity of talking with you all about the digital work that I've been doing on the Grand Tour project for many years now, as Franz said. And I might cut, because I really want to know also your feedback. So I'll try maybe cut some of what I plan to say so that we have time for questions. So the Grand Tour, I think most of you know already what it is. I need to introduce it more in the US, but it has been interesting that here, even at the gym, people immediately knew what the Grand Tour is and had good advice for me in Florence. It's but just for the sake of definitions, is the voyages of tens of thousands of travelers journeying to Italy in the 18th century, and this is also Grand Tour is how they were known then and since. These are travels in the age of enlightenment, therefore, that contributed to a massive reimagining of politics and the arts, of the market for culture, of ideas about education and leisure. Fitting as a topic also with our exchange that we have been having between the Bay Area and the Lagoon, travels and conversations across culture. So I now talking to you about the Grand Tour project. They started more than 10 years ago, but now it's an interesting time because finally there is a publication of the work. And this is as here it is. As Franz told you, this book Here, it's only a digital book. You have the cover, a word made by travel on top. It's open access, so you can go and do all you want with it and invite others. Then here you see also the table of contents, and in particular the table of contents of the database that sits at the center of the book. That's the Grand Tour Explorer. And in fact, this is an open access and digital publication that facilitates the explorations through a data-driven lens of the lives and stories of 6,007 of these 18th century travelers to Italy. So I say 6,007 with these precisions because the numbers do count when talking about and thinking about 18th century travel to Italy. We actually do not know. We have no sense of precisely how many people traveled, and there is not even a single archive of the Grand Tour as such. It's not an institution with an archive. Not that archive give you precise numbers even, but it's much more dispersed in terms of a topic and its survival. But when scholars have been trying to estimate the travelers, even just for the British travelers that are also the focus of my work, one thinks it's tens of thousands in the course of the 18th century. So 6,007 is by no means exhaustive, but it is much larger than what anyone has been making the focus of one's single study. So what I hope with this project is really to reveal a diversity of experiences, elite and otherwise, that collectively constituted the 18th century Grand Tour of Italy. And this is about a new method of study and new findings, opening up to public and the general public, scholars and students alike, digital data and analytical resources, while also making the case for a more inclusive and representative world of travel to Italy in the 18th century. So in the time that we have together, after showing you a classical image of Grand Tourists, this is what instead is like the elite British, in this case, male traveler that we'll come back to. I have 4 sections I want to get through that you see there on the slide, but I also want to say 3 things that I would like you to keep in mind as I talk. First, that as Franz also already alluded, this is really an experiment in form as well as content. And it's really trying to see what is it possible now that we can do digital research and digital publishing. And underlying this experiment is also the big questions of what is the advantage, what does really change in thinking and researching the past with these new digital forms. The second thing that I want for you to keep in mind is really the relationship between the quantitative and the qualitative, which is not a new focus of historians thinking about the past, but it's thinking really how does this change if we do have a big numbers like 6,000, but also these new digital methodologies. What happens to this relationship between the quantitative and the qualitative in this digital environment of research? And then lastly, also you will see that there are big numbers, but what I do care, and I say this all the more in this moment of big data and AI, I really think, after all, it's the most important thing is about practices of data curation, of data sharing, and really trying to understand what it might mean to do history on digital pages, and therefore what happens in this other relationship that it's important to think with as digital historians about the paper record that is at the basis of much of what we do about the past, as well as visual records, and what happens when we move to instead the ephemeral but powerful and shareable more and sometimes more easily or faster and larger quantities of the digital. But let me start with the first part, and I really want to start at the very beginning, the origin story of this project. And this is a story of a discovery of many, many years ago when I was still a student. And I found in the Sealy Historical Library of Cambridge University, if anyone knows the panopticon-like kind of library, in open shelves, I made a discovery that was exciting back then of a 73 English edition of the German Riedesal's travels to Sicily. And not only I found this on open shelves, the 1773 book, but when I opened it, I saw that there was an anonymous traveler that added notes and comments about his own experience in Sicily, interleaved within the results account. So I'll take you there a moment. So imagine yourself to be on the northern coast of Sicily, near Cefalù, and imagine here a British man who has, as people do, fallen asleep since time immemorial, mythical or not. He had fallen asleep under a tree in the afternoon heat, in the siesta hour. And he's woken up by a menacing mass of locals. And there are some tense moments, and then he finally manages to understand that this mass of locals have mistaken him for a dangerous local robber, the actual historical Brigante Gamba Corta that was an important presence at the time in the countryside. But finally, with some trepidations, he manages to communicate as he recounts, and this is the underlined words there. I'm quoting his words: "I'm an Englishman who visited Sicily out of curiosity, natural to travelers." So there is so much that one could say about this passage, about the linguistic and visual misunderstandings between the external visitor and the local people, how much of this is actually such a topos that we find again and again since ancient Greece onwards, about also reading practices and annotations in travel literature. But I now want to focus, and also this clear sense of mode of travel that is shared and recognizable. Basically, there is a definition of the Grand Tour here, like traveling on account of curiosity that is natural to travelers. But what I want to underline here today is what happened next after I discovered this manuscript. So my first question, of course, was who was this traveler, the author of these anonymous annotations? It was quite a compelling narrative many times. And so back then, and this will also date me as an undergraduate, as a graduate student, I turned to a resource that I thought would help me answer the question, which is this Dictionary of British and Irish Travelers to Italy, 1701-1800, compiled from the Brinsley-Ford archive by John Ingamills, that had just come out. And so I started looking through these pages and trying to find anyone, because I knew exactly about this anonymous traveler, the day and time of day he climbed Etna, when he got to Palermo. So I just was looking for someone who would fit the profile in this biographical dictionary of travelers. But the fact is that I never found anyone back then. And so this was a frustrating search, but I think it's also the seed of when we started mapping Republic of Letters and we were thinking about projects. I thought I want to make a digital version of this and then find out what would this change? I mean, like, could you find and say, tell me everyone who's in Sicily in 1766, like my traveler was in June, and find who that might have been. So the journey, as everyone who has done digital humanities project, has been not as simple as that. It took many, many years and it underwent many transformations. We started, in fact, doing by hand, and these are the hands of my very first collaborator, who is now a Professor Molly Taylor-Poletsky, drawing the informations about the travelers into a spreadsheet. But we also realized soon after that there were better ways to do this, computational, more systematic, and that would give us a more robust database. And this is how we did with a digital version provided by the Paul Mellon Center. We started applying several regular expressions and ad hoc scripts to isolate and meaningful tokens from the semi-structured syntax of the dictionary. We could do all of this because it was also already somewhat structured, this information, and because of the tremendous work done by Sir Brinsley for over 50 years, which makes me think like our project was not that long. It took 50 years and it never finished putting together what then became the dictionary. So I'll give you just, I don't know how many of you have experience of this work. It's also true that probably now we have to do the experiment yet, but with AI, we could just with the text do this much more simply. While ours was long, iterative, but it was really like read like in the case of marriage, M dot would be marriage. If followed by date is the date of marriage, 1, 2, 3 sequence of marriage, and then name of spouse. And all of this we did for all the various informations that were in the dictionary about both biographical facts and travels. And we constructed our database that here you see in a beautiful rendition by another of the collaborators. I don't even have now a slide that shows all the collaborators anymore, but it's become a visualization challenge that I have to yet do. One that I have, it's old but now there are so many more people. So when I say we, it's not Royal Majestatis, but it's that this has really been involving so many people and the origins of so many friendships and collaborations also beyond the project in the course of time. What you see here is a very nice rendition graphic of the data schema. Like this core is a traveler entry ID. Every traveler of the 6007 has a number. But then this is the spread of all the possible informations that we have about them. And in fact, at the very bottom is travel, place, and date. And this seems the smallest one, but actually it's the most complex because, as you can imagine, the dictionary did not have precise information to begin with, but it was also not systematic. And sometimes it will be someone was in Venice before June, but left on November 5th. So it's a great variety of type of information that we know about anyone of these travelers. So I think it's important for me that not only to show these clarifying and correct, even if I do think some of you have heard this again already, but I do think that another experiment I should run now, I don't think that anyone in the database has all this data. Like that would be the monster, the Frankenstein travel. Like there is no one that has every category and dimension filled in, because some of them pertain to gender or other kind of different categories, so that you wouldn't get that person. And so that's also an important thing. And I show you another visualization that is exactly designed to convey the fact that there is not only we don't have all the information for everyone, but it's not also a discrete. It's not that there is a person that we have all and then we progressively less for others. But for some people, we know a lot about their travel, and some other people we know instead a lot about their education. And so it's very varied also across the database of travelers, the amount of information. So this is one of my favorite visualizations that I did with a student, Ragavi, and a collaborator from Density Design in Milan, and it's actually animated. So it's fun, I think, also to like. But the animation is also to give a sense that you really need to kind of start playing with this data and hold all the variations that you can have in the database. But what does one single entry look like? And I show you here the one that always gets shown because it's Charles Abbott, the first one in alphabetical order. So it's the one that we always look at the most. And you see, and I hope it's good enough, but you can also follow in the book itself if you want. But you'll see that in the center, we reproduced the entry just as it was in the dictionary. And that was something very important to us to maintain. also it's like the source text in a way. On the two sides, you have on the right the travel data with also an animated map on top, and on the left the biographical data. Moreover, first I want to, moreover, what this is that most of it is actionable data, meaning that you can use it as the starting point of further explorations. And this is what was the dream to begin with, but I think that by now we're all more used to these things, and it wouldn't take as long as it took us to figure out that this would be the most powerful thing we could do. But of course, you see the date of birth here is 1757, and in fact, if you click on 1757, you get everyone in the database born in 1757. So you can start reading what was a text also generationally, or like in this case, if it's date of birth, or anyone who was in Pisa in the same time, or like, so it's a cross section that opens this reference text that was a dictionary to a very different kind of use. If we go back a moment to this, you'll see that there is also in green are the men, and in orange are the women. What also happened is that, and this is not a category that was, for example, in the dictionary. It's one case of the category that we superimposed, like it was implicit in the dictionary, right? But what happened is that at first we were limited to the more structured parts of the dictionary, the biographical and the travel. And I remember the first time we tried to do something with the narrative parts, it didn't go very far. But meanwhile, time went on, and Stanford also released the natural language process toolkit, NPL toolkit, that allowed very easily to do name entity recognitions. And so we got everyone who is a person in the old text. Again, that meant a lot of reconciliations work, from the fact that Monviso would come up as a person and you say, no, that's a manta, not a person, to the fact that Dante comes up, and then it's your choice. Do we include Dante or not? Kind of things that people who are working with this kind of data are familiar with by now. But what happened is that we found a lot of what we ended up calling the hidden figures, travelers who did not have their own entry, but were subsumed in someone else's entry. And most of these, unsurprisingly possible, were women. So while because they were the wives or the daughters of travelers or companions. So while in the original dictionary, there were 4,800 entries, of which 200 for women, we now have 6,007 because we have 955 women. So this is like the biggest change. And it's not all the women, but it's just that it really changes the way you think about this world of travel. And one other thing that we decided to do is, this is an example of one of these hidden figures of Viaggiatori Sommersi, of this woman, as in the middle, you don't have the entry from text, but just this block that explains this is one of these people that we accepted, to also show, even visually remind people that this person was not in the original database. One other thing to keep in mind as I explain the way to move through this data is that you see that the list is a primary way. Like if you click on 1757, you get a list of all the travelers born in 1757. If you click on Pisa 1781, you get everyone who was in Pisa in 1781. And the list is very powerful in many ways. But what also we realized, because we were holding all these copies of the fat big book, that I don't travel with it myself because it's a very heavy thing, that you also lose a lot with the list and the digital. And so we created, in fact, this visualization that it's also interactive, where every dot is a traveler. If you hover any dot, you see the name, and then if you click on the name, you get back to the entry again. But the point of this, and here they have different sizes because they're sized by word length. And this gives you immediately the sense that not for everyone we know the same amount of information. So it's very different from the list approach. And in fact, it's interesting for me that if one holds the dictionary, and I tested this, like we know how to read books, we know how to understand books, and people go through briefly and they can estimate how many entries there are in a work like that because of our easiness of like what we have learned handling books for so long. And I think people also get a sense that there are many more men than women. That's something else that happens pretty quickly. And I just moved to the next one where you see how I don't always. Okay. Yeah. This is also where the same dot chart is colored by gender, and it's a way that you immediately see that two things that the women in the original, these are the entries that were in the dictionary originally, are much fewer, and there are many more women in the entries that we extracted by computationally, and we have much less information over word length because, as you saw, they don't have as much knowledge. We also had the lack of that data not available when we thought that we couldn't do this gender attribution, and so we just left it, but represented it as this is where we couldn't do it. Okay, so this is the longest part, but I want to quickly move to the next question, which is like, so, I mean, I hope I love these visualizations by now. Like it was so much fun to create them and do all the work, but what is it that one can do with this as a digital resources? So a little bit about working with the data. And so I just show you one, but of the 6 ways to access the Grand Tour Explorer, which is a database, the Explorer is the one that I end up using the more. And if you click on Explorer, you get to this interactive interface where you can browse and query and search. And so you can combine, say, like, show me everyone who was in Venice, but not in Pisa, or who was in Venice in this year. So you can combine all the categories or exclude one, and everything becomes a result that you can download and save, or send a link to someone else, but also download on your own computer, as well as you can download the entirety of the data. So the exciting things for us is what do other people do? And I'll show you some example, very basic ones with the downloaded data. So if we go back to the image, which is one that I use with also with students because it communicates so much of what the Grand Tour is about. You know, this like the selfie of the time that communicates you are in Rome by of course, they were not there not even there all at the same time. We have 6 copies of these paintings because it was given to everyone in the group. One of these men was added later. But I also like this painting because it's a case in which it took 4 different attributions to establish that it was actually painted by Catherine Reed, one of the few women. But again, it's a time in which it's very easy to lose sight of the women. And so I use this for the students, but also if you use even just the basic data of mentioned names for these 6 and create a network graph, you get to this, which, it's not at all everyone that they encounter during their travels, but already you get a sense where there are some women that appear. So like if you think of them in this in the background where there is no one, just some token Italians in the background or local people, here you have an old social world that begins to take shape. And you see also that the nodes connecting them are either diplomats or artists. So that's what really also connected these travelers that otherwise you see just as these 6, a conversation group, but just about these 6 men. I show you, like in the book, we also publish sections with scholars engaging with the data, and it was great to involve this other 7 colleagues who came and used the data and did studies, and we worked together and learned a lot in both ways. And they also shaped how we would do the dictionary. And so I just show, there must be a better way to.
Maybe more on the left from the pad. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is another network kind of Melissa Calarezo, who focused on the painter Thomas Jones, and we know that he at some point says, I'm done with the British. I want to really get to know the Italians. And this social move also mirrors the fact that in his journals you can track how he started liking Italian food in the course of his long stay. And so once he's out there, he has many more Italian artist connections in Naples rather than in Rome. And so Melissa could track this just with the data from the dictionary. And then one that is important because we are in Venice is Rosalba Carriera, who of course doesn't have an entry in the dictionary because she's an Italian painter. But just by saying everyone who mentions, which is something you can do in the interface, with too many, there are these 81 and travelers who are mentioned, and many of them we already know that they had portraits or other things done, and in particular Catherine Samo is an expert on the lectures of Rosalba Carriera, knew a lot of this already, but she also found many new things, as much as even like a network of women, friendships that she could track through the dictionary, as well as some descriptions of the studio itself of Rosalba Carriera. So even you can find even Italians when this is a dictionary focused on the British, like in the traditional form, all the people who have an entry are British, but there are other ways you can start to operate in this. I show you another briefly, something else that we did. It was the first study that was published in AHR, by me and the early collaborators, which was a study of the 69 architects you could find in the dictionary. And to me, that's important as a number because 69 is not big data. Any computer scientist will say, what? Who cares? But and I did count how many usual architects you find in other kind of works, and it will always be, if you read any history of British art in the 18th century, somewhere between 5 and 10, and you recognize most of the names. It's Sir John Soane, Adams, Milne. While what we have in these 69s is also the ones who maybe didn't make it. They were unlucky. They died in Italy. They changed a profession. They moved somewhere else. Like change so you get to see really the becoming, what it meant to become an architect. The time in Italy meant in order to tell the story of professionalizations. And so we did this. This is one of the interactive visualizations that you can find still on the site of the Mapping Republic of Letters. This is a timeline of the travels of the 69 architects. And again, what happens is that at the very bottom, we have 3 for whom there is no information because we just know that they were in Italy in the 18th century, but not enough from our data to know even when. But they become part of the story. And what happens is that, again, even if we have very varied information, in the same story that one can tell about someone like Sir John Soane that has got one of the longest and most varied timeline of travels because the travel colors are different regions in Italy, is part of a story that you can tell by including also these other people who maybe did not become architects at all. And this is where you can find more of the interactive visualizations. So lastly, in the book, we also have a part that I did in particular with Rachel Midura, who has been here or is coming here again, which was she worked as a graduate student on the project. And so we also have a part which is about how to teach this material in a classroom and how to do a class on the Grand Tour that includes the data as well as primary sources. And in fact, the students are come up with very original projects a lot and new things. It's only 10 weeks and so on, but I also find a very satisfying way to bring in students into this, a computer scientist, even into studying history in the 18th century. A few words on the problem. I said all this, how all the things you can do and the richness, but it remains true that, of course, all of this is a database that is mired by missing data, uncertainty, and what can we do with all these gaps? So a few words on that before I conclude with some words on digital history in general. So this is what happens if you put all the Grand Tour Explorer data in a Palladio map that shows you the geographical distributions and the timeline underneath. There is a usual problem with geographical representations that, of course, no one could have just gone to Rome without going somewhere else. And so that you need to start taking into account how people is about maybe time spent, leaving a record, the record that we have, like we have so much about Padua up to a certain point, because there was a register of travelers at that point. So even the distribution of and presence of places is to be taken with care and critical thinking through of why certain dots appear larger than others, even if there is nothing to, like, you can explain them. I mean, there is nothing, it would have been problematic if, I don't know, like Trento became a huge dot in this image. But if I look at the timeline briefly, you see that there is a lot of ups and downs. And what has been interesting there is also that a lot of the ups and downs, you can really map them with the words of the time. So like in traditional works about the Grand Tour, people will say, like from Jeremy Black and others will always say, you know, there is less trouble during the time of war. And in fact, it's nice that the distribution of these peaks and valleys in the timeline map pretty well with that. And also that there is an increase over time. I mean, again, it would have been disconcerting if instead it was a decrease over time of the travel. So there is this part of the digital humanities, which is also a criticism of digital humanities, where all this work just to confirm what you already knew. So what's the great insight? So some people think, well, it's good that we can confirm it with data, but I also do think that I hope we can do even more than that. And in fact, what to me has been interesting is that let's take one of these deep, like 1781, that I'm still so embarrassed that when Alexander Nehammer, one of my professors, asked me, why is that? And I was like, oh, I don't know, you know. And of course, then the next day I was like, of course one can say, right? Because it's 1781 is by the time that the War of American Independence had become influential in the Mediterranean. So it makes sense that there would be a dip at that point. But what I think we can do now with data is that it's beyond the dip, beyond saying there is less travel. We actually, it's interesting that one starts thinking, well, what about those 49 that are there? I mean, like it's a dramatic drop in travels, but what are the stories that you can say about actually the people who had traveled? And, you know, there is by now research, and I know this also from my colleague and one of the authors in the Explorer, that explains how, in fact, even the French at some point wanted to encourage travelers to keep traveling because there was already an economic dimension to travel. So while there was ways, so there are people who did travel in any case. But if you start looking at those 39 that we have in this 1781 dip, you start to get individual stories. For example, which are revealing. For example, in Florence, the diplomat at the time was Horace Mann, and we have so many letters from him. And he had a nephew who visited him every year with his daughter. And it is true that in these years, he goes less. So 1781 is a year, like he starts going hungry only every 2 years. And 1781 is a year in which he doesn't go. Or, for example, another way to see who goes, you find in the data and therefore in the dictionary, because you can always go back to the individual, that there is this General James Murray, who was the governor of Minorca, that arrives in August 41st, 1781 in Leghorn, because, and I quote from the dictionary, he evacuated his family during the French siege. And so, in fact, the text of the dictionary tells us that he brought along with his pregnant wife, that by now has her own entry, as you see on the right, about 20 other ladies. So you start to understand a different sense of mobility. And it's not just like there is less travel during the war, but you can start asking who travels and why, and what is that kind of movement. I think really it's interrogating these absences and presences and the individual trajectories that lie behind the bar charts. It is a process that points beyond the simple use of data visualizations that confirm known trends, and instead points us towards new findings and new questions, which is the most important movement for anyone doing historical research. But more insight into the interplay between the quantitative and the qualitative, and into how we might begin to think about missing data, also comes from considering the counting done by many 18th century travelers themselves. So tourists also at the time watched and counted other travelers, often reporting their numbers in the letters and journals describing their journeys. And I'll give you just one example. Joseph Atwell, who traveled in 1729, 1730 as a 24-year-old tutor to the 21-year-old, the second Earl of Cooper, reported in a letter in June 1730, written from Florence, that there were no less than 14 English in Florence. So this was like so tempting, and I just wanted to see, let's see, what does my database say? Like how many are the travelers in Florence in 1740? There, it was an interesting finding, and these are the ones that you find. So you get 18, but two of them are Atwell and the Judge Earl Cooper, which you think he did not count. So between 13 and 16, it's a pretty close match. Like you say, oh, that's interesting. But it's only with a closer look at these entries in the Explorer that you see the few, if any, of these travelers beside Atwell and this Judge Lord Cooper. And now you have it organized in alphabetical order. So rather than most of the others are long-term residents who found different ways to make a living in Florence, such as diplomats. There is an innkeeper, and that's John Collins and his wife, Mrs. Collins. There is artist. There is also the intriguing character of William Joy, who is a strong man that performed in Covent Garden, and the Grand Duke got to come to Florence as a bodyguard with him. So all these other people, they make up of this world. And so the question then poses itself, who did actually Atwell count? Did he count the women? Did he count the Catholics? Did he count the Irish, the artists, the long-term residents? When he says there is no less than 14 English in Florence, who might he be counting? And these are, I think, also questions that I think come up alive and in an interesting way once you are able to work with data that are both at scale and granular. And this question of counting is important for us because beyond the most clean numbers and clear quantitative measures, counting always requires the decisions about categories and dimensions. This was true for Atwell, but it's also true for the makers of the dictionary that decided who to include or not, Zirbelin, Seaford, and his team, and actually for ourselves when, for example, we decided to include the women more, so it's always a decisions, but you can start interrogating these decisions in different ways. So basically, what I think is the most beneficial outcome, and I go back to that image that I showed you before, and that I'm now it's great to see it live and moving in all sorts of ways. But the most significant benefit of the transformation of the dictionary into the Explorer, along with the foregrounding of the hidden figures that revealed all these other submerged travelers, is not so much the total mass of data as much as the data's density of information, the systematic nature of the categories that organize this information, and the clarity that we have tried to impose about the boundaries and limits of these informations as a data set. So what you can really see now is what has remained stubbornly uncertain about the Grand Tour, and it's crisscrossing between data sets that facilitates new questions as well as interlaying, like different categories used at the same time. But of course, and I want to, this is how you can follow an individual through the data set, for example. And I also, it's an honor of Valentina has worked on these archives so much, it's important to remember that all of this it's not made up in the dictionary or not born digital. It all comes from actual records that have their own occlusions and the things that we don't know. For example, in this case, we have this forced for in top left, you see this all English visitors, but then it says con 4 camerieri e 5 domestici in livrea, that gives you a sense of other people who were not counted in the dictionary, for example. But if you can go back, become counted in different ways. So I want to conclude briefly with some general thoughts about digital history and some of the issues that I see that we need to consider going forward. So, and I think that thinking where we started with this project and where we are now, for sure, also thinking about data and numbers has changed so much. And now we talk about AI, and just like I remember when, as Mapping Republic of Letter, the first talk one of my colleagues gave at Harvard and was received so badly. By now, data is the new oil, or data literacy is a new value. But I do think that even in AI, is based on data, and the kind of critical attitudes that we can bring to data remain very important. But we also have to be careful in how we think about data and about quantifications. And I really like, for example, the contrast with earlier form of cliometrics that Claire Lemercier and Claire Zalk have called upon when they call themselves alternative quantifiers, emphasizing and embracing the messiness of data, pointing to the interrogation of assemblages layers, not only to explore what is missing, but also to consider how different layers overlap and how outliers can reveal specific forms of interaction among categories. So I want to then take the question of the value of the Explorer and data for us in this project by considering in particular prosopography and digital prosopography, because this is what this dictionary was to begin with, and our data. Now, I have a very interesting questions by audiences more and more that says, what about the objects? What about, could you do an object biography in the dictionary and other? I think those would be very interesting to do and could be done, but that's not what we did so far. We did look at the animals a little bit, and it's a lot of fun to see how many animals come up. But, in the organizing principle is travelers and these humans, and this is a prosopography of travelers. And so thinking about prosopography and biographies, we do have here this interesting case of bridging the micro and the macro, the local and the global, that underlies the old dictionary and I think the old database. And in fact, it becomes brought to the fore even more, because now we can easily go from a category to an individual, a group, the whole, and zoom in and out. Still, we all know the problem of the bridging the micro and the macro for historians at large is it's not resolved and an ongoing big questions. But I want to conclude with three quotes that helped me think through these matters a lot. The first one comes from Emma Rothschild, and I don't know how many of you have read this Infinite History book that she published recently, which is interesting because it's a story of Angoulême through 3 centuries and through 4,000 lives that she followed. And she talks about how precisely now it's the kind of research you can do now because it's so easy also to find people online. And the ambition in her work has really been to see, she thinks, the unfolding of historical times by following these 4,000 lives and 3 families through 3 centuries. But I also like also what this idea that she has of like these individuals that are glimpsed out of the corner of the eye or at the edge of the screen, and how many new possibilities this opens up. But also then remembering, and here I quote Lara Putman, which with her 2017 article where she coined this. It's an article called The Transnational and the Text Searchable, where Lara Putman also thinks about the new cons of shadows of the digital. Because what about all the lives that are not digitized, have not been digitized, will never be digitized? And so to attend to this, and a lot of this is a difference between the global South and the global North, but not only. There are new, we think, there are new, very significant cons of shadows that are emerging in this digital moment. But for sure, when I read Emma and Lara, I can see that what we have done with the world made of travels by foregrounding unrepresented or hidden figures has been really to bring them out of the shadows and back from the edge of the screen by poring over missing data and inconsistencies in the original print dictionary, by working to reconcile the presence of obscure names and identities, by going beyond the most famous and recognizable grand tourists whose stories have been told again and again. In fact, sometimes I feel like the project takes up the words of, and one can go back to Virginia Woolf in her 1939 essays, The Art of Biography, where she did write, the question now inevitably asks itself whether the lives of great men only should be recorded. Is not anyone who has lived a life and left a record of the life worth of biography? The failures as well as the successes, the humble as well as the illustrious, and what is greatness and what is smallness. And these words by Virginia Woolf are particularly resonant for me working with this material because she actually echoes and channels the words of her father, who was one of the people who worked on the dictionary of national biography, the first dictionary of national biography for the British nation. And the father also was saying, who do we count or not? Who comes up in the Dictionary of National Biography, who should be included? And in fact, quoting his word, Virginia Woolf's father's word, one of the tests of the project's value has been for us to be able to do research on the less conspicuous people who populate the many digital pages of the dictionary and really challenge and see how our previous perceptions of the world of the Grand Tour and what happens when you include all these other people. And in fact, turning again, and then I go back to the final quote, to the 18 in Florence, it's been interesting that now that we have this as data, you can compare easily who of these people is in the dictionary, Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, that by now is also online and you can download the data for. And it's interesting to see that actually of only 4 of these are in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. One is William Joy, the strong man known as the English Samson of the time that I told you that the Grand Duke of Tuscany brought over to be his bodyguard. Then there are the 2 Hackford brothers, the artists, in a single entry, and then the portrait painter William Hoare. But it's also important to remember that if you go to the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography looking for William Joy or William Hoare, or finding them, there is no mention of the time in Italy. So there is an other way in which things are not, lives are broken up in different national traditions. So that you don't read that William Joy basically ends his life in Florence. But doing this at scale, this comparison between the 6,007 that we have in our database and the 20,000 lives from the 18th century that are in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, it's an interesting set to compare. 6,000 are not an inconspicuous number if you think that there are 20,000 in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. But what's more interesting yet is that proportionally, we have many more women. In the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, out of 20,000 lives, there are 2,000 women, and out of our 6,000, we have 900 women. So these are all things about counting that then you can go back and really about who counts and how do you count them, but that can bring you back to, I think, also individual stories, individual agency, and how history develops for people. And in fact, here, this is a very preliminary also, so you see in visualizations that I think it's failing at multiple levels that we've not yet worked on to. This shows you the different kind of information that we have about the men and the women in our data set. And now one project that we are doing now is really going through these 955 women and understanding what is the grand tour of these women. And it will take time. This is just the first 22, but even just with this first 22, there are incredible stories that are coming up that have not been part of the story of the grand tour. For example, there is this Catherine Toft, number 18 here, who is someone who also has an entry in the ODMB, who kind of peaked early as a singer in Covent Garden and then was overtaken by other singers, and she was only 20. So she's lucky that she marries this British diplomat in Venice. So she comes to Venice as a young person, and the husband dies shortly after, and she has a very long Venetian life, and in fact she is buried here. And so you start just wondering about women's lives and in transnational context in all different ways. And this is a case in which I can even find a painting of her. She's the one in white here. So it's an extraordinary case. So this will not be the case with most of these 955, but it's all individual stories that we got to from these big data or data-driven initially work. And here is also where I want to conclude on this quote by Sabina Loriga, that has been very powerful for me in thinking about these matters of quantity, like the 69 architects and the different new stories that you start to get by taking them as a whole, where she says this collective biography is an historiographical space where what matters is variety. So it's not about knowing everything about everyone, but that you might know bits and pieces that are significantly different, since only a multitude of experiences enable considerations of the two fundamental dimensions of history, that is conflict and potentiality. And so I'll conclude on her words, and thank you for listening, and I really hope we have time for questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for this wonderful insight in this sort of project. We now have enough time for discussion. Also, people participating from external or online. You can raise your hand or write into the chat if you have question or comments, and then you can unmute yourself. So the floor is open for questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. It's really exciting to see what you're doing there, and also about finding all these unheard voices and unknown people, particularly women. So that's very exciting to me. A question about your sources. So why did you find this information? Were they all printed and edited? So you had the picture with this guy presenting the hands of your collaborator, or you had look also in manuscript, letters. How composite is your corpus?
Now that's an excellent question, and I have to be. It's good to be very clear about this. The database is only what's in the dictionary. There was a moment when I started adding things that were not in the dictionary, but then we realized that we would become like Brinsley Ford and never finish. And so we stopped that. But I know that there is some piece of data that I added and I don't know where it is. So there is like a difference. If this will die sooner, as it like but one could find that at some point. But at some point, for example, like there is Wordsworth, the poet, should be in there because he walks as a student, so still in the 18th century, without telling his parents one summer all the way to the lakes. And so at some point I created an entry and we started saying, what about all the people who should be there and then we know? But then we decided not to do it. And then also one first version of before publishing, we actually had, because it would be easy to do, the ability for people to add other travelers or even adding information like the incompleteness, even for the like some of them, Esther Piozzi, like the travelers I know best, there is not every stop is recorded that you can document, even from the text that have been used by the compilers of the dictionary. So there would be ways to add. And moreover, if you go to the Paul Mellon Center in London, where they had all the material from which the dictionary was built, there is all the things that didn't make it into the dictionary, but also there is another room that after they published the book, all the letters by people who said, add this, add that, and they didn't do it. So it would be great if one could imagine this as an updatable, interactive platform. The press was one of the conditions is that we can't touch it. And it's an important experiment in digital publishing. Like even if I find mistakes now, they're like typos. But all the data is there and one can download it, one recreate a different, I'm not doing this now. Like it's so nice that instead what I'm doing is not just taking on the entire database, but for these 955 women, we are creating a new database that will have different categories and what kind of, there is so much less, but like we can't have the same schema that was based, like education, like so much education information in the dictionary is about university records. And of course, women were not admitted in university. So we'll have to figure out different ways. But the invitation that I have, even when I teach students, is that they can use the data that they get from the dictionary, but they have to integrate, it's part of the final project, with a primary source beyond, that they have to bring something new to it. So that has been our principle of working. But I know just recently someone really took objection with the fact that if you know that something is wrong, do you leave it? And I will now say, yes, because it's a citation. This is what was in the dictionary, so, but I can see that it has been a choice that we had to make. I think we did correct some typos at some points, but then there was a moment when we didn't, and it would have been too hard to find it. But that's a problem of documentation in this kind of projects. Then it became, this is what's in the dictionary. Then you can get the data and do more with it, and you show your like that. So a lot of my students are very unhappy with me having used this binary gender category, and I write about it and say, this is the moment where, and the Grand Tour in particular is a world of a lot of gender experimentations and ambiguity. But in terms of these lives, there was a big difference again. If you were not, there were places you couldn't go into as a woman. And so I didn't want to lose that important distinction. But some students have taken the data and found different gender categories. Even you can transform the data. That's the thing. You should quote where it comes from and what additions you did. But does that answer the question? But now I'm excited to go back. Like, what's extraordinary about this work of the dictionary is that precisely Brinsley Ford worked with a big team going to different archives. So you have a strange, while it's not exhaustive, and in fact, if you go to one of the entries, you'll see that it says we have sources, because the dictionary itself would say this comes from Hamilton's letters, this comes from the Venetian State Archive. And another thing that you can do now is that you can search and say, show me all the entries that use Thomas John's diary. So the sources, you can go through the data with sources too.
Yeah, Emanuela.
Thank you for this inspiring seminar. Just a quick question. I was wondering if you are going, or if in the future the project is going to publish this data also in some other ways, for instance, into Wikidata, to make to maybe also to enrich this data and enrich the data into other platform, and also add the right data that are not good into the dictionary.
Yeah, you would add it to yes, that's we finally did this, and I show you how you find. No, we finally did all this work, and I show you where you find all the data now, which is in the Stanford Data Repository.
I'm not sharing, but when you
I'm not sharing.
Share again.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought it.
Like a reconciliation with the author.
We'll do this. I mean, one thing that we started saying is that so far it's like, who is in Wikidata or not, already or not, and that's it. Like, but
yes,
that would be a very good thing to do, and we will do it. I'll do it for the women to begin with, because I guess that, I mean, we could just like put it all, and we haven't done that. But I think I want to do it with data that I worked on.
Yes, because I checked some data into the Grant2 platform, and they are more than the Wikidata or other environments, and
many more.
It's a pity that these data are not reconciled with this type of data. In Italy, for instance, Passarotti with the Lila ERC project. It was a knowledge-based project, and they gave the data into Wikidata platform.
That's we published this, and I've been talking, but that seems like an easy thing to do after all we did. But we should do it. We should not forget. It's an important step to do it, because now, am I sharing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you find. I mean, I could even.
Yes.
You saw.
Yes.
Yeah. But so it's not hard to move it, but it should be done.
Thank you for.
No. Thank you. No, that's true. You make me think we really should do it sooner rather than later. I now just want to think about I mean, I think I'm taking a break from thinking about the whole thing, but I could ask someone could do it, not even us, and it would be important, and it would be interesting because very few people are in Wikidata already. Thank you. If anyone wants to do it, because the data is there also like to do any work with.
Yeah, so that's wonderful to open up the data and to connect to authority files and other resources. So you also then have other people doing the job of adding more information. Did you think also about widening the scope as regards the regional aspects or the temporal frame? And then, I mean, it's a European movement. I mean, it's getting out of control in a way. So it's interesting to see the requirements of academic publication, this ambitious publication, to maintain the corpus and the data and the community that wants to make everything so wide and connect to all the knowledge resources that are out there. So
it can be done. Like, you know, one could even do a different, a complete different interface with the, now that the data is there and available. I would do it differently. We have to do it now. But I think as often the problem was who is going to maintain, like the press was like, absolutely not. But Wikidata instead would be it's great that it's there. I think it's also something that wasn't on the horizon. Like the last 3 years were just like editing and correcting. But I think it's a very good question. I think I should say that it will be done by the end of summer. Like, but take it on.
No, I mean, it makes perfect sense, and important that the publisher is okay with providing the data freely, so that people can work. So you have a contained publication that is identifiable and has clear criteria. So this data is all taken from that publication. So I think that's fine, because then you get into trouble if you mix everything. But so we have this stable point of reference, which is one requirement of scholarship, but still at the same time it's data that can be used and it's available and can be enriched and connected to other. I think that's a best compromise you can have.
Yes, I don't know how it will. What will be the future possibilities beyond like it's. I think that we are in a much better place than we were even when we started this in terms of possibilities and thinking, but it's I don't know what else could facilitate even more. One thing I discovered is that this is open access, and I thought that's such a, we all are for open access, and it's a good thing. It's very hard for people to notice that it exists, or even like when I sent it, like when it was, how do you communicate or make it clear that it's open access? Half of the people I sent it to wrote back and say, so where do I buy it? Is it, and it's still happening now. So I don't know what we could have done differently in that. It's an interesting challenge, and I'm not just worried about the fact that, of course, there are websites, and then how do you get traffic on the website? But I'm so surprised that it remains so opaque, that even people encountering it.
I think
just
it's
imagine
still a question of the research culture. That that's you can't change the way people perceive or the expectations. Gradually, yes, with advancing publication formats, but in general, it's how the community works. So they are a bit slower.
But yes, I don't know if we should have written like not just enter, but please, like I don't like, really, it's just been interesting that for it doesn't seem to be.
Ulrike.
Here, Ulrike Wutke, visiting here from the University of Science at Potsdam, and I see your license there. a Creative Commons attribution,
Mhm.
non-commercial, no derivatives license, which might be part of the problem, or maybe even of the fear of working with your data set, because non-derivative would actually mean you can only use the data set in its completely, it's as a whole. So you are not allowed to change anything. So that's some way, and if we think of communication, that would be very interesting for me, because if you hear now also about formats like data articles, so you could be writing something about your data set and to tell the community how has it come into existence, what were your rationales behind it, and how would you like people to work with it, to encourage use. But yeah, it's maybe also would depend on, are people allowed to change information? So then we go back to the discussion before.
Yeah, but I mean, people can change, and it's about just citing where you got it from, and it's starting to happen, and it's exciting. Let's see, views, or here you see views, and that's not that many, but you know, this is one way to, because the other way is just that you, like if you are in the Explorer, but you're right. And one thing that the Platz wants me to do is this video that will be there, and I haven't done it yet. So okay, we're getting to all the things that I haven't done yet. But you see, you can just, I think most people just do, you do select all. This is what all the students, for example, do. Also, almost to a fault, because they say, no, you have to read and understand what it is, you know. But and you just do export results, and so many, you just get all of them, all of the data that way. I don't know how, you know, there is this it is an all part of the book, presenting the data, that I have a very hard time. Any student, I think, you know, they just don't think, why should I be carrying and reading? Where we, I mean, and I spend so much time, but I explain, but it's not, again, it's an experiment that I don't know how successful it is. I mean, like, I know people who have read it religiously and care for it, but explaining, like, that also for each category, it explains how it came into being, and there is some sense of, for example, one point is interesting about the gender, because I'm so concerned about the representations, that if you think, because a lot of people that are here, a few hundreds are people who were born in Italy, like, so they have a travel age 0, and for those, so they're children of travelers basically, but they count as travelers, and the gender balance there is 50-50. So that's another way to think statistically, that there is something that holds quite well in terms of the robustness of the representations. I'm almost surprised that that's the case. But, you know, so I think there is so much here that one should, but it's completely clearly of not something that it's very hard to, so I think it's good, it's there, it's documentation, but I spent so much time, but it's not maybe like, but another, it is relates to this part though. Because if you go back to the Explorer, let's say here, you know, this question mark, this is the beginning of the data, and then if you click on learn more, it gets you back to the part of the book where there is a longer explanation. One thing that's also, and I think I work with great designers, but it's designers got always, like, you know, there is all these explanation of how things work that, again, doesn't seem to. So many people ask me, oh, but how do you, oh, but there is like, so I don't know, these are things that then we can change, but think maybe, the book, we know books so much and but it took a long time to get to certain great formats of publication in print that makes sense for us. But no, I'm disappointed that this is also something that no one seems to see. But it's, yeah, and maybe we should have designed this better. But it is there eventually. And when there will be this video, I've done it to people individually, and really should be. And it takes an hour to go through every aspect. But so I don't know who will watch an hour-long video then too.
These are very interesting experiences. Yeah. So I mean, you should collect this feedback. That's interesting because it tells more about the audience than about the product. I think you made a perfect job with all the documentation and the tutorial. But so users, so like me, I'm going into the thing and I want to find immediately what I'm looking for. And I don't care about documentation. But then you learn, oh, it's more complex than you think, and then. Oh, the publisher is stupid, or the researcher. You go, oh, you're actually stupid because they don't read the manual. Yeah. So that's
but exactly like manuals. Who reads the manual?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
but if you then appreciate the data and how it's done, and you trust now, okay, maybe I should read it because it's actually useful. Then it's up to the user, I think. So I don't see this as a sign of shortcoming on your side, but on the user side, and there are no routines and standards for this kind of publication. People have to learn, and that's happening now.
Yeah, and I wonder how it will become easier. It's more like so. I think this will look so out of date, even in these basic things that we spend so much time, which is perfectly fine. But in not so long, and how do you work with it?
Will have incunabula status at some way.
But I'll tell you one interesting thing about publication, and then I think I don't want to keep everyone too long, but if we go back here, and this is another thing I've not done yet, that the press won't say, you see that it says archive. So if you now click archive, you don't get anything because it's not finished. And it says within 6 months of publication, and that's not true because we're almost 1 year. So I don't know why I'm doing this talk of all the faults, but this is so interesting, and this is something that the press, the Stanford University Press, started this series with a big Mellon grant that now it's exhausted, and so mine was the last book in the series. But basically, what the best way I can explain this is like almost a simulacrum of the book. This book, it will not be completely successful, but for others book like in the series, they will be better because basically it's a sort of like the principle is a little bit like Internet Archive, like crawling, but it's handmade and exhaustive. And it's really terrific and Jasmine Mulliken has designed the whole process and so on, but basically, when you use the simulacrum, you don't even know that you're not using the real thing because it's done in a way that you click and you think you're clicking, but actually it's just teaching like it's on, clicks here, this is what happened. It's almost like a movie of the whole experience. And she has taken into account all the possibilities. The problem with something like mine is that imagine the part of the book in the, like, I don't even know, maybe someone is very good at math, they can do it immediately, but all the possible combinations of the 6,000 travelers, if Jasmine had to try, like, I don't think it's humanly possible to do all like, because in a way she would, for others publications, which are less complex in terms of, I mean, she would have, like, you'd click on birthplace and Dublin, and then someone was a state, like she would need to follow those through in all possible variables that I don't even know. It's impossible, right?
ChatGPT.
Oh, they could do it.
A large language model
But
to do
all the possible things. But could they do the crawling of it? Why didn't she think about it?
maybe with Python a script that make all the possibilities with the query.
She tried to use ChatGPT for certain things and it didn't work well. But it was for something else. It was just for
with Python,
yeah.
To take all this
And combine that with this scrolling. It would be like I don't even like that's a very interesting idea. I'll tell her. I don't care. Like I think that this is not so important because there is the experience. You can recreate this whole thing. Like important thing is the data. But for the other project, she has done it, and it's extraordinary, really. That this archive or similar. And the idea is that when this will die, because I don't know which part will be the first to die. I'm curious. I think the map, probably. But oops. Okay, I did a thing that's a problem when you change this, resize the screen to problematically, and then it's not happy. Well, maybe this is also because we're done, but that's an interesting thing. Like I thought that it was beyond the scope of what, because then I'll ask her though, why she didn't think about it. Okay, we have to go back. Let's go to
Yeah.
it could be done.
Some urgent.
Maybe
question?
it's a very short question,
Mhm.
but I'm
Please.
now very intrigued. Are there comparable projects like other nationalities traveling to Italy?
No, unfortunately, I know the Gilles Bertrand, he wants to create something, but he doesn't have a resource like the dictionary. The Brinsley Ford took 50 years to do, and in fact, if you go, so this is a way of looking at the sources. You see, the one that's most referenced is the Archivio di Stati di Venezia. And in fact, if you go there, there is next to every British person, there is a little, very, now what you should do in an archive, right, Valentina? There is a little circle with a pencil done by one of the archivists who was collecting the information and sending them to Brinsley Ford. But Brinsley Ford himself he had all this, like, it's not exhaustive, but it's very interesting that he put together, these are all the different archives and other sources that goodbye. But speaking of reconciliations of information, an extraordinary amount of work that now we can exploit this way. But I don't know. Yes, I think though that maybe you can imagine a future when if all the archives are digitized and there is like all of that. But I'm now waiting for it in.
So if there are no any further questions, I would like to thank you again very much, Giovanna, for this exciting presentation and insight into the work, and it's never over. So there's a lot of work.
Now you know
we
the
can
list
do.
of things
So
to do.
thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you also to everyone who is
Thank you.
organizing here this series, Stefano, Elisa, and our student interns, Mariam and Aim.